I still remember the morning it started, because it felt so small, just a letter. A fine, $500 for snow tracks. Out here in Wyoming, that's like getting fined for breathing in winter. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then another letter came. Higher fine, stronger wording, and then the threat. They said if I didn't comply, they could restrict road access. That's when I realized something wasn't right, because that road, it wasn't just a road. It was the only way in and the only way out. I had been clearing that road for months, not because anyone told me to, because people needed it. Families, workers, kids trying to get to school. In winter, that road wasn't convenience. It was survival. But suddenly, the HOA decided my tire tracks were damaged, and somehow, their own vehicles were still driving through just fine. That's when I started paying attention. I began documenting everything. Photos, videos, timestamps. Every track in the snow told a story, and the deeper I looked, the worse it got. Because it wasn't just me. Neighbors started messaging me. Quietly at first, then more. They were getting fined, too, for things they didn't even do. Some had already paid, just to avoid trouble. Others were scared, and that's how it worked. Not through force, through pressure. Then I found the money. Hidden in plain sight. A contractor that didn't exist. Hundreds of thousands of dollars paid for road maintenance. While the road itself was falling apart, that's when it stopped being about snow and became something much bigger. Then came the storm, a real one. The kind that doesn't ask permission. The kind that buries everything. And that's when they made their move. They shut the road down, completely. Said it was for safety, but I had cameras, and what those cameras showed changed everything. They were still using the road, secretly, through a hidden gap, while the rest of the community was trapped. No access, no way out, no help coming. And then, someone got hurt. A kid. Asthma attack. Couldn't breathe. And the road they said was closed for safety was the only thing standing between him and a hospital. That was the moment everything changed. Because this wasn't about rules anymore. This wasn't about fines. This was about life. And I wasn't going to wait for permission. I broke through their barrier, got him out, got him help. But what I found buried under that snow wasn't just metal. It was proof of control, proof of intent, proof that this wasn't an accident. From that moment on, I stopped reacting and started building a case. Evidence stacked, financial records exposed. An insider came forward, and suddenly, everything they thought was hidden started coming to light. The road disappeared completely after that, because I stopped plowing, and without me, it didn't exist. That's when they realized the truth. They didn't control the road. They depended on it. The community woke up, the media got involved, and the courts stepped in. What followed was something they never expected. An injunction, an investigation, a collapse of everything they built. But that's just the beginning. Because what we uncovered next went far beyond one road, far beyond one storm. It exposed a system, a pattern, and a level of corruption that changed everything. If you think this is just another HOA story, it's not. This is about what happens when power goes unchecked, when silence becomes control, and when one decision forces the truth into the open. Stay with me. Because what happened next took down an entire board, uncovered a financial scheme, and turned a frozen road into the moment everything broke. The first notice was waiting for me before the sun even cleared the ridge. A white envelope, stamped, cold as the morning air biting through the cracks in my front door. I stood there for a moment, boots still wet from the early snow, staring at my own name typed in block letters like it belonged to someone else. The wind outside carried that low, hollow whistle Wyoming gets in winter. The kind that sounds less like weather and more like a warning. I opened it slowly. Violation notice, unauthorized snow track, damage. I read that line 3 times. Snow track damage. I actually laughed. Not loud, not angry, just confused. Because out here in Carbon County, snow tracks weren't damage. They were survival. They meant someone had made it home. But the letter didn't stop there. It listed a fine, $500. And below that, in smaller print, a threat continued noncompliance may result in restricted road access. That was the moment something shifted. Not panic, not yet. Recognition. Because I'd seen language like that before. Not in HOAs. Not in neighborhood disputes. In case files. Back when I used to sit on the other side of a courtroom, watching patterns unfold. Watching small abuses stack until they became something bigger, something deliberate, something organized. I folded the letter carefully and set it on the kitchen table next to my coffee. Steam curled upward in slow ghost-like spirals, and for a second, I let myself remember the version of me that used to tear systems like this apart. Then I shook it off. I wasn't that man anymore. Out here, I was just another homeowner. A guy with a plow truck. A quiet life. A road that needed clearing every morning if anyone wanted to get to town. That road mattered. More than they understood. I stepped outside again. The snow had come down heavy overnight, 6 inches at least. Powder on top, packed ice underneath. The kind of layer that turns a simple drive into a gamble. My truck sat where I left it. Diesel engine block still ticking faintly from the early run I'd done before sunrise. I'd already cleared the road once, not just for me, for everyone. That stretch of gravel cutting through the valley wasn't technically mine, but it wasn't fully theirs either. It existed in that gray space HOAs love to manipulate. Easements, shared maintenance obligations, language buried in documents most people never read, but I had read them months ago. Back when something first felt off. I walked down toward the edge of the road, boots crunching through fresh powder. Tire tracks cut clean lines through the snow. Mine, straight, controlled, functional, and right beside them, another set, wider, messier, SUV tread. I crouched, slightly brushing away loose powder with my glove. Fresh, not mine. Which meant one thing, they were using the road, while fining me for maintaining it. I stood up slowly, scanning the distant line of homes further down the ridge. The HOA cluster. Uniform rooftops, clean driveways. Not a single one buried the way they should have been after a storm like this, because someone had cleared access. And it hadn't been their contractor. That much I already knew. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera, timestamp on. I took a series of photos, wide shots first, then close-ups of tread patterns, angles showing direction of travel. Old habits, you don't just look at evidence, you build it, layer by layer. I moved further along the road following the tracks until they curved slightly toward the HOA boundary, marker a weathered wooden post most people ignored. I didn't, because that post marked where responsibility shifted, legally, technically, conveniently, depending on who was writing the rules that day. I snapped another photo, then one more, and finally, I recorded a short video. Slow pan, narration under my breath. January 14th, 6:42 a.m. road cleared by private equipment. Additional vehicle tracks present originating from HOA direction. I stopped recording, exhaled. There it was again, that feeling. Not anger, clarity. Back inside the house felt warmer. But the letter still sat there waiting. I picked it up again this time, reading every line, every clause, every word choice, because language tells you everything. And this letter wasn't written to enforce rules. It was written to establish control, selective enforcement, vague definitions, escalation triggers, and most importantly, no mention of their own obligations. I walked over to the filing cabinet in the corner of the room. Old habit I never broke. Top drawer, HOA documents, CC&RS, bylaws, maintenance agreements. I pulled them out and laid them across the table. Paper against paper. Claim against reality. The maintenance clause was exactly where I remembered it. Section 4.2. Primary access road shall be jointly maintained to ensure safe and reasonable ingress and egress for all residents. Jointly, not selectively, not conditionally. I flipped to the enforcement section. Fines could be issued for damage, but nowhere did it define snow tracks as damage. I leaned back in my chair, slow, measured, because now the picture was forming. And it wasn't about snow, it was about leverage. If they could redefine normal behavior as a violation, they could fine anyone. If they could fine anyone, they could pressure them. And if they could pressure them, they could control the entire community. My phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. I opened it. "Hey, you got one of those letters too, no name." Just that. I stared at the message for a second. Then another one came in. "They hit me for $300 last week. Didn't even drive that day." And another. "They said my driveway runoff damaged the road." I didn't recognize the numbers, but I recognized the pattern. Quiet compliance. People paying fines to avoid conflict. People too isolated, especially out here, to push back. That's how systems like this grow. Not with force, with silence. I typed back slowly. "Don't pay it yet." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then came the reply. "Who is this?" I hesitated for a moment. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because saying it out loud meant stepping back into something I'd walked away from. Finally, I typed, "Someone who's seen this before." I set the phone down. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying loose snow across the road in thin, drifting sheets. It wouldn't take much. Another storm, another day. Without maintenance, that road would disappear. And if it did, every house past that ridge would be cut off, including mine. I looked back at the violation notice one last time. Then I grabbed a pen, wrote a single word across the bottom. Disputed. But I didn't send it. Not yet. Because disputes like this, they weren't won with one letter. They were built, documented, exposed, and somewhere deep down under years of trying to live a quieter life, I could feel that old part of me waking up, not loud, not reckless, just precise. The HOA thought this was about snow tracks. They were wrong. This was about something much bigger. And they had just made their first mistake. The second letter arrived 2 days later. Different envelope, same tone. This time the fine was higher. $750, repeat violation. I stood at the window as I read it, watching the road I hadn't touched since the first notice. Snow had already begun reclaiming it. Thin at first, just a dusting drifting over the tracks I'd left behind, but underneath, ice, packed, hardened, waiting. That's how roads vanish out here, not all at once, slowly, layer by layer until traction disappears, then access, then options. I folded the letter and didn't even bother sitting down this time. Instead, I grabbed my coat, my gloves, and something else I hadn't used in years. A small, black notebook. Field notes, because if they were escalating, so was I. By 7:15 a.m., I was back at the road. The wind had shifted overnight, pushing snow sideways across the valley. Visibility wasn't terrible, but it was enough to blur edges, enough to hide movement. Good for them, better for me. I walked the same stretch as before, boots crunching, breath visible in short bursts. But this time, I wasn't just observing. I was mapping. I marked distances, angles of entry, depth of tire compression. I crouched again at the junction where the HOA boundary sat. The SUV tracks were back, same width, same pattern. But now there were more of them, multiple passes, and one set deeper than the others. Heavier vehicle, possibly loaded. I ran my gloved fingers along the edge of the tread, fresh within the last hour, which meant whoever was using the road was doing it early, quietly, before anyone could see. I pulled out my phone and started recording again. January 16th, 7:22 a.m. Multiple vehicle entries from HOA side. Road condition deteriorating. No evidence of contracted plowing. I stopped. Zoomed in. There. A detail most people would miss. One of the tire tracks had a slight wobble in its pattern, subtle but consistent. Alignment issue. That vehicle would be identifiable. I took photos from every angle. Then I stood up, scanning the ridge again. Still quiet. Too quiet. Because if residents were being fined like this, they should have been out here, asking questions, but they weren't. And that told me something important. They were scared. Back inside, my phone had more messages. Different numbers this time. Same story. I paid mine already. Didn't want trouble. They said they'd lean the house if I didn't. Board president came by in person. That one made me pause. In person. Pressure tactics. Direct contact. Not standard procedure. Not unless they wanted something more than compliance. I opened my laptop and started building a spreadsheet. Names if I could get them. Phone numbers, dates of violations, amounts fined, descriptions. Pattern recognition doesn't happen in your head. It happens in data. Within an hour, I had 12 entries. By noon, 19. And the numbers weren't random. They were targeted. Same cluster of homes, same stretch of road, same vague violation language, selective enforcement, clear as daylight. I leaned back staring at the screen. Then I opened another folder. The one I hadn't touched since moving here. Public records requests, FOIA templates, still saved, still ready. I hesitated for just a second, because once I started this, it wouldn't stay small. But then I looked back at the spreadsheet, at the amounts, at the dates stacking closer together, escalating, and I knew. They weren't planning to stop, so I printed the first request, addressed it to the county, requesting road maintenance contracts, HOA filings and amendments, any permits related to access road modifications, complaint logs filed by the HOA against residents, paper, slid into the tray with a soft mechanical hum. I signed it, dated it. That was step one. By late afternoon, I made a decision I knew would change everything. I installed cameras, not hidden, not obvious either, strategic. One mounted on the corner of my garage, facing the road. Another lower angled to capture tire patterns clearly. Both with timestamp overlays. Both backed up to cloud storage. Chain of custody matters, even when no one's watching yet. I tested them as the sun dipped behind the ridge, casting long blue shadows across the snow. The road looked different now. Untouched. Abandoned. Except for one thing. Movement. Around 5:43 p.m., the first vehicle came through. Headlights cutting low through the dusk. SUV, same tread pattern. Same slight wobble. It didn't slow down. Didn't hesitate. Just rolled straight through the section they claimed was damaged. I watched it from inside. Didn't step out. Didn't interfere. Because evidence doesn't need confrontation. It needs patience. 10 minutes later, another vehicle. Pickup truck this time. Different tires. But same direction. Same origin, HOA side, using the road, freely. While the fines kept coming. That night the wind got worse. You could hear it pushing against the house like something alive. Low, constant pressure. I sat at the table reviewing footage, frame by frame, logging timestamps, cross-referencing with my notes. And something started to emerge. Not just usage, timing. The vehicles came through at specific windows. Early morning, late evening, never midday, which meant they knew. They knew when people weren't watching. They knew exactly how to avoid attention. That's not coincidence. That's coordination. I pulled the HOA bylaws back out and flipped to enforcement authority. Board discretion. Broad. Dangerously broad. And then I found it. Buried in an amendment. Section 9.1 CE. Emergency access control measures may be implemented at board discretion to preserve road integrity. I stared at that line, because that was the lever. If they could claim damage, they could restrict access. If they could restrict access, they could decide who moved and who didn't. I closed the document slowly. Then I opened the ledger files I'd requested from a neighbor earlier that day. Unofficial copies, but enough to start. Line items, payments, contractor names. One entry caught my eye. Immediately. Winter Road Preservation Services, $48,000. I frowned. Because I hadn't seen a single contractor. Not one truck, not one plow, just me. And whoever was using the road behind closed doors. I highlighted the entry, then another and another. Same vendor, same vague description, large amounts, no detail. I exhaled slowly. There it was, the second layer, money. Because it's always there, hidden under whatever excuse they use on the surface, snow tracks, road damage, safety. It's never about that. It's about where the money goes and who controls it. My phone buzzed again. Same unknown thread. Road's getting bad. Another message followed. They're talking about closing it completely. I looked out the window. Snow was already drifting across the surface again. Another storm rolling in. Fast. I typed back, "Don't drive tonight. Pause. Then, why?" I stared at the screen for a moment, then answered honestly. because they're about to make it disappear. I set the phone down, and for the first time since this started, I didn't feel like I was reacting anymore. I was ahead of it, because now I understood the pattern, the enforcement, the timing, the money, and whatever they were planning next, it wasn't going to be small. Outside, the wind howled louder, sweeping snow across the valley in long, relentless waves, erasing tracks, erasing evidence, erasing the road itself. But not mine. Not this time. Because I had already started building something they couldn't cover up, piece by piece, frame by frame, and soon they were going to realize they weren't the only ones watching. The storm didn't hit all at once. It built. Low clouds first, then wind, then that steady, relentless fall that turns distance into a blur and silence into pressure. By morning, the road was half gone. Not buried yet, but compromised. And I still hadn't touched the plow. That part mattered. Because now, every inch of snow on that road told a story, and I was done guessing. I started the day with the ledger. Coffee untouched, lights low, laptop open. Numbers don't lie, people do. The file I had wasn't official, not yet. But it was enough to see patterns. Winter Road Preservation Services, it showed up again and again. Large payments, clean entries, no itemization, no dates tied to actual work, no mileage logs, no equipment usage, no subcontractors listed. That alone was a red flag. But then I noticed something else. Timing, the biggest payments, didn't line up with storms. They came before, sometimes days before snowfall, sometimes when the weather had been clear for a week. I leaned forward, scrolling slower, because that kind of mismatch, that's not sloppiness, that's structure. I opened another tab. Weather records, public data, easy to access. I cross-referenced dates, storm versus payment, and just like that, the gap widened. $48,000, paid on a week with no snow. Another 32, same pattern. I sat back, exhaled. There it was. Not just mismanagement, fabrication. My phone buzzed. Different number this time. Board meeting tonight. Emergency. I stared at the message. Emergency. Right on schedule. Because that's how escalation works. Create a problem. Control the narrative. Then act fast before anyone asks questions. I typed back. What's the agenda? Pause. Then road closure. Full restriction until damage assessment complete. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because now I knew exactly what they were doing. They were going to shut it down, lock access, and blame the very people they'd been fining. By noon, I had everything I needed to take the next step. I printed the second FOIA request. More specific this time. Payment authorizations tied to Winter Road Preservation Services contractor registration and licensing, internal HOA correspondence regarding road conditions. Any complaints or incident reports tied to snow track damage. I added one more line. Include all digital communications, including email and SMS, related to enforcement decisions. Because if they were coordinating, it would be there. It always is. I signed it, dated it, then drove it into town myself. The road, what was left of it, fought me the whole way. Ice under powder, steering loose, tires slipping. I knew exactly how close it was to becoming impassable. And that was the point. They weren't maintaining it. They were letting it fail. On the way back, I took the long route, past the HOA cluster. I didn't stop, just slowed enough to observe. Driveways cleared, perfectly. Not a single buildup at the edges, no uneven plow lines, no amateur work. This was professional, consistent, which meant one thing. They had access to a plow, just not for the road. I kept driving, slow, careful. And then I saw it. Parked behind the clubhouse, partially covered by a tarp, but not enough. Plow truck, industrial grade, same model as mine. I felt something tighten in my chest, not anger, confirmation. I didn't stop, didn't take a picture, not yet. Because evidence like that, you capture it clean, deliberately, with context. I'd come back. By the time I got home, the wind had picked up again. Snow cutting sideways now, visibility dropping fast. The road was worse, much worse, and still, no contractor, no HOA crew, nothing. I walked inside, shut the door, and went straight to the cameras. Footage from earlier, I rewound. Paused. There. Frame 12:08 p.m., SUV again. Same tread, same wobble. Driving through a section they claimed was too damaged to maintain. I zoomed in, license plate. Not fully visible. But enough. Partial match. I took a screenshot, logged the time. Then I opened a new folder. Vehicle ID, because this wasn't just about usage anymore. It was about who. The messages started coming faster that evening. Residents. Worried now. Roads almost gone. They said not to leave after tonight. They're putting up barriers. I stood at the window again, watching the snow erase the last visible tracks. And I realized something. They weren't trying to fix anything. They were accelerating it. Let the road fail. Then declare emergency control. Then restrict access. And in the middle of winter, that's not inconvenience. That's leverage. At 6:17 p.m., the cameras caught something new. Headlights. But slower this time. Careful. Deliberate. I leaned closer to the screen. The vehicle pulled up near the boundary marker. Stopped. Two figures stepped out. Heavy coats, hoods up. One of them carried something. Metal. Reflective. Barrier. They worked quickly, didn't speak much, just positioned it across the narrowest part of the road. Then another, and another. By 6:26 p.m., the only access road was blocked. I didn't move. Didn't grab my coat. Didn't step outside. Because this was the moment. And I needed it recorded. Clear. Uninterrupted. Timestamp. Visible. Every second. They finished. Got back in the vehicle. Drove off. Using the same road they had just closed. I let the footage run for another 10 minutes. Then I saved it. Backed it up. Twice. I sat down slowly. The house felt quieter now. Not peaceful. Just still. Because something had just crossed a line. Not policy. Not enforcement. Control. Illegal control. And they had done it on camera. I looked at the ledger again. At the payments. At the fake contracts. Then back at the footage. At the barrier. At the people who thought no one was watching. And for the first time since this started, I allowed myself to say it out loud. Fiduciary breach. Not a guess. Not a theory. A direction. I reached for my notebook and wrote it down. Underlined it once. Then added another line beneath it. Pattern suggests coordinated misuse of funds and access control. I paused. Then wrote one more word. RICO. A question. For now. But not for long. My phone buzzed again. Same thread. They closed it. I looked out the window. Couldn't see the barrier from here. But I didn't need to. I had already seen it. Recorded it. Proven it. I typed back, I know. Pause. Then what do we do? I stared at the message for a long moment. Because that was the real question. Not about snow. Not about fines. About what happens when a system stops pretending to follow its own rules. I took a slow breath. Then typed, we document everything. Another pause. Then, and I looked back at the footage one more time. At the moment, the barrier went up. At the exact second, control shifted. Then I answered. And we make sure they can't hide it. Outside, the storm finally reached full force. Wind howling. Snow erasing what little remained of the road. And somewhere beyond that white wall, a community was about to realize they had been cut off, not by weather, but by design. And this time, I was ready. By the next morning, the road was gone. Not just buried, erased. What had once been a narrow strip of gravel cutting through the valley was now a smooth, unbroken sheet of white. No tracks, no edges, no indication it had ever been there at all. Except I knew better. And more importantly, I had proof. I didn't rush outside, didn't grab the plow, didn't try to clear anything. That part of me, the one that solved problems with action, was still there. But this wasn't that kind of problem anymore. This was a case, and cases aren't won by fixing the damage. They're won by showing who caused it. I started with the footage. The angles, full coverage. From the moment the first SUV rolled through days ago, to the exact second the barrier went up. Time-stamped, backed up, unbroken. I watched it again in silence, not for the story, for the details. Because details are where people make mistakes. Frame by frame, I tracked movement, vehicle entries, timing gaps, patterns. And then I saw it. Something small, easy to miss. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. At 5:43 p.m. 2 nights ago, the SUV passed through like before. Same wobble, in the tire alignment, same speed. But as it turned slightly near the boundary marker, the driver's side door reflected light from my camera. Just enough. Just long enough. To catch a shape. Not a face, not clearly, but a silhouette, and on the shoulder, a patch. Rectangular, dark background, light lettering. I zoomed in. Enhanced contrast. And there it was. HOA. Not a guess, not a coincidence. Uniform, official. I leaned back, slowly. Because that changed everything. This wasn't just board members bending rules. This was coordinated. Operational. They weren't avoiding enforcement. They were controlling both sides of it. I pulled up the ledger again, scrolled to the contractor name tied to those payments. High Ridge Winter Services. Generic. Too generic. No address listed, no license number, just a name. I opened a new tab, State Business Registry, typed it in, nothing. I tried variations, still nothing. I checked county filings, nothing. No registration, no permit, no tax ID. I sat there for a moment, then nodded once, because I'd seen this before. Ghost vendors, shell entries used to move money without oversight. On paper, services rendered. In reality, nothing. Except maybe a check going somewhere it shouldn't. I highlighted every payment tied to that name. Totaled them. $186,000 for a road no one had maintained. My phone rang. Not a text this time. An actual call. Unknown number. I answered. Silence for a second. Then a voice. Low. Careful. You're the one looking into this, right? I didn't answer immediately. Let the silence sit. Then who's asking? Pause. Then I used to do their books. That got my attention. I stood up slowly. Walked toward the window. What changed? I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. They asked me to sign off on payments that didn't exist. There it was. Confirmation. Not from data. From inside. I kept my voice even. Do you still have access? Some documents. Copies. I nodded to myself, because this was the break. Don't send anything yet, I said. Not electronically. Why? Because if they're this careful, they're watching. Silence again. Then, you sound like you've done this before. I almost smiled. Something like that. We arranged a time. Neutral location. Public. Safe. Then the line went dead. By noon, the storm hadn't let up. If anything, it had gotten worse. Wind pushing snow into hard drifts now. The kind that don't just cover roads, they seal them. And the barrier completely buried. Invisible. But still there. Blocking access beneath the surface. Just like everything else they were doing. The messages from residents had shifted. From confusion to fear. My husband can't get to work. We're running low on supplies. They said emergency vehicles will be allowed through, but how? That last one stayed with me. Because I knew the answer. They wouldn't. Not in time. Not safely. And if something happened, if someone got hurt, that wasn't just negligence, that was liability. Serious liability. I opened a new document. Title Preliminary Findings, HOA. Access Control and Financial Misconduct. Because it was time to formalize this. Not just collect evidence. Organize it. Structure matters. Especially when this reaches court. And it would. Soon. I started typing. Timeline of enforcement notices, evidence of selective road usage, video documentation of unauthorized barrier placement, financial discrepancies, tied to non-existent contractor, potential breach of fiduciary duty, possible coordinated pattern of fraud. I stopped there, looked at the list, then added one more line. Risk to resident safety due to intentional access restriction. That one mattered. Because courts move faster when people are in danger. Around 2:40 p.m., I suited up. Heavy coat, boots, gloves. And I stepped outside, not to clear the road, but to see it, up close. The wind hit hard, snow stinging against exposed skin, visibility down to maybe 20 feet. I moved slowly, carefully, following where I knew the road used to be, each step uncertain. Because underneath that snow was ice. And beneath that, a system someone had decided to weaponize. After about 50 yards, I reached the spot where the barrier had been placed. I stopped, looked down. Nothing visible, just smooth, untouched snow. But I knew. I took out my probe rod, something I kept in the truck for situations exactly like this. Pushed it down. Hit resistance, metal, exactly where it should be. I marked the spot with a small flagged stake, then stepped back, took photos, wide angle, close up. Timestamp on, because even buried, it existed, and that mattered. As I turned to head back, I saw movement through the snow. Headlights, faint at first, then brighter. A vehicle approaching, slow, struggling. It came from the HOA side. Of course, I stepped off to the side, watched. The SUV reached the barrier point, didn't stop, didn't slow, because they knew exactly where the gap was. A narrow opening they'd left for themselves, hidden under the snow. The vehicle passed through clean, continued down the road, past me. Without even noticing I was there, I didn't move, didn't wave, didn't react, just watched it go. And in that moment, everything became clear. This wasn't mismanagement. It wasn't even just corruption. It was control through isolation. They had created a system where they could move freely, while everyone else was trapped, and they thought no one could prove it. Back inside, I stripped off my gloves slowly, sat down, opened the footage again, added the new clips, labeled everything, organized, precise. Because now, I had enough. Enough to file, enough to expose, enough to stop this. But I didn't rush, because timing matters. You don't move when you're angry. You move when the case is airtight. And this one was getting there. Outside, the storm continued to rage. But inside, everything had gone quiet, focused, sharp, because somewhere along the line, they had forgotten something important. Snow melts, records don't, and cameras never blink. By the third day, the silence had weight. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that presses against your chest when you realize no one is coming to fix this. The road was gone, completely. What remained was a frozen channel of wind-packed snow and buried ice, with only faint shadows hinting at where tires had once passed. And beneath it all, that barrier still stood. Invisible. Intentional. I woke up to 12 missed messages, 3 voicemails, and a photo. I opened the photo first. A woman mid-40s, face pale, standing in front of her house. Behind her, the road. Or what used to be the road. Unrecognizable. Caption, "My son has asthma. We can't get out." I stared at the image longer than I should have. Because that was the moment this stopped being a case and became something else, urgent. I called her back. It rang twice. She answered on the third, voice tight, holding it together just barely. They told us to wait for instructions, she said before I could speak. They said emergency services would have access. I looked out my window at the white void where the road used to be. "No," I said quietly. "They won't." Silence. Then, "What do we do?" I didn't answer right away. Because there are moments where the truth matters more than comfort. "They're controlling access," I said, "not preserving it." Another pause, then a whisper. Why I closed my eyes for a second. Because I already knew the answer. They needed leverage. By mid-morning, the HOA made it official. Mass email, subject line, emergency road closure, resident safety notice. I read it once, then again. Because language like that, it's crafted carefully. Due to extensive damage caused by unauthorized vehicle use, the primary access road is temporarily closed to ensure long-term structural integrity. Unauthorized, damage, integrity, all the right words, all the wrong truth. Then came the line that mattered most. Access will be granted to approved vehicles only until repairs are completed. Approved. I leaned back in my chair. Because there it was, not hidden anymore. Control, clear, direct, documented. The messages exploded after that. Residents who had stayed quiet before weren't quiet anymore. "They're saying we need permission to leave. They denied my request this morning. My husband's stuck at work. He can't get back in." Fear had turned into anger. And anger. That's when people start listening. I opened the footage again. Pulled up the clip from yesterday. The SUV passing through the hidden gap. I isolated the frame, enhanced it, zoomed in on the side panel. There, clear enough now. HOA insignia. Not a guess, not a blur. Proof. I exported the clip, saved it under a new folder, Access Control Restricted Entry. Because this was no longer just evidence of misuse. This was evidence of discrimination, selective access. And in legal terms, that changes everything. At noon, I drove out, not toward town, toward the clubhouse, slow, careful. The truck struggled through the drifts, tires slipping, engine working harder than it should. Because I wasn't clearing the road, I was forcing my way through what they had allowed to fail. And every inch of resistance, every slide, every near stall, it told the same story. This wasn't neglect, it was design. The clubhouse came into view through the snow like something out of place. Lights on, driveway cleared. Of course, I parked at a distance, didn't approach directly. Instead, I stepped out and circled wide, keeping low against the wind. Because I wasn't here to argue, I was here to see. And what I saw confirmed everything. Behind the building, partially shielded from view, the plow truck, same one, engine warm, tracks fresh. I crouched, slightly brushing snow away from the tire. Same tread pattern as the SUV, number different, but nearby, there they were. The SUV tracks, looping in, looping out, using the cleared access behind the clubhouse, private, unrestricted, while the rest of the community stayed trapped. I took photos, slow, deliberate, multiple angles. Then I stepped back, recording video this time, narrating quietly. January 18th, 12:42 p.m., HOA controlled vehicle access observed behind clubhouse. Road conditions inconsistent with claimed closure due to damage. I stopped recording, saved it, backed it up. Because this was the pivot. As I turned to leave, the door of the clubhouse opened. A man stepped out. Mid-50s, clean coat, no urgency in his movement. Board member. I'd seen him before. He spotted me immediately, paused, then walked closer. "You shouldn't be out here," he said. "Not aggressive, not yet, just controlled." I didn't respond, just watched him. "You're making things worse," he continued. "We're trying to protect the community." I almost laughed, but didn't. Instead, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, opened the video, turned the screen toward him. The SUV passing through the barrier, the insignia visible, the hidden gap. His expression didn't change immediately, but his eyes did. That quick flicker, recognition, risk. "You want to explain that?" I asked. Silence, wind howling between us, snow cutting sideways. Finally, he spoke. "That's authorized access." I nodded once. "Exactly." Then I turned the phone off, put it back in my pocket. And that's the problem. I didn't wait for a response, didn't need one, because everything that mattered had already been said. And more importantly, recorded. Back home, I sat down and opened the document again. Preliminary findings. I added a new section. Evidence of selective access enforcement through concealed entry points, video documentation of HOA, authorized vehicles bypassing closure, discrepancy between stated safety measures and actual operational behavior. Then I added another line. Potential civil rights implications due to restricted emergency access. Because now, this wasn't just about contracts, or money, or even control. It was about harm, real, immediate, and preventable. My phone buzzed again. The woman from earlier, his breathing's getting worse. I stared at the message, then stood up slowly, walked to the window, looked out at the storm, at the road that no longer existed, at the system that had allowed this to happen. Then I made a decision. Not as a homeowner, not as a neighbor, but as someone who knew exactly how far this had gone. I grabbed my keys, my coat, and my phone. Because whatever happened next wasn't going to be quiet anymore. As I stepped outside, the wind hit hard, but I didn't hesitate, didn't slow down. Because for the first time since this started, they weren't in control anymore. They just didn't know it yet. The engine roared to life like it had been waiting for permission. Diesel always sounds louder in a storm, deeper, like it understands what's at stake. I gripped the wheel tighter than I needed to and pulled out into what used to be the road. The tires slipped immediately, fighting for traction against the layered ice beneath fresh snow. This wasn't driving. This was negotiation. Every inch forward had to be earned, and I knew exactly how close this was to going wrong. Her house sat about a mile down. On a clear day, it would have been a straight shot, 10 minutes. Now, it felt like crossing a boundary someone had deliberately erased. The drifts were worse the further I went. Wind had piled snow into uneven ridges, some nearly waist high. I kept the truck steady, avoiding sudden turns, letting the weight of the plow blade guide the path, even though I hadn't dropped it, not yet. Because the moment I did, that would be a statement. And I wasn't ready to make it. Halfway there, I saw the first sign of failure. A sedan, abandoned, half buried. Driver's door opened just enough to let snow curl inside. I slowed down, stepped out. The cold hit hard, sharp enough to make your lungs tighten. No one inside. Good. But the position of the car told me everything. They had tried, and the road had won. Or, more accurately, the system had. I took a photo, logged the location, then got back in and kept moving. By the time I reached her place, visibility had dropped to almost nothing. The house emerged slowly through the white windows, dim porch light barely cutting through the storm. I parked as close as I could, grabbed my medical kit, and stepped out. She opened the door before I even knocked, eyes red, face tight with fear. "He's inside," she said. No introductions, no small talk, just urgency. The boy couldn't have been more than 10, curled on the couch, breathing shallow, each inhale sharp, each exhale strained. I knelt beside him, calm on the outside. Because panic spreads fast. Assessment first, always. Airway clear, chest movement uneven, skin slightly pale. Asthma attack. Not full respiratory failure yet, but heading there. How long, I asked. Since early morning. We use the inhaler, it's not enough. I nodded. Because I already knew. They needed a hospital. Not later. Now. And that's when it hit me. Not the situation. Not the urgency. The realization. I had seen this before, different place, different people. But the same moment. Where delay turns manageable into critical. Where access means survival. Or the lack of it means something else, something permanent. I closed my eyes for just a second, then opened them again. Focused, sharp. Because that part of me I thought I'd left behind, it hadn't gone anywhere. "Get him bundled up," I said. "We're moving." She hesitated. "The road, I know the road I cut in. And I did. Better than anyone out here. Because years ago, before Wyoming, before quiet mornings and plow routes, I had spent a decade building cases where systems failed people exactly like this. Assistant prosecutor, then later, special investigations, public corruption, emergency negligence, cases where someone decided rules mattered more than lives. And I learned something in those years. When systems break, you don't wait for permission. You document, you act, and then you make sure no one gets away with it. We moved fast. I carried the boy, light, too light, his breathing uneven against my shoulder. She followed close behind, grabbing what she could. The truck engine still running. Good. No time wasted. I got him into the passenger seat, strapped him in, handed her the kit, monitor his breathing. "If it gets worse, tell me immediately." She nodded, hands shaking. I got behind the wheel, looked ahead, nothing but white. And somewhere beneath it, a barrier designed to stop exactly this. I shifted into gear, pressed forward. The truck fought back, tires spinning, then catching, then slipping again. I adjusted, slow, controlled. Because speed wasn't the goal, consistency was. We hit the first drift hard. The front dipped, then pushed through, snow spilling over the hood. The engine growled, held, kept going. Halfway to the barrier point, the wind picked up again. Visibility dropped to near zero. I leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on where I knew the path should be. Not guessing, remembering. Because I had walked this stretch, measured it, mapped it. And that's the difference between reacting and knowing. Then we hit it. The barrier, buried, invisible, but solid. The truck jolted hard, metal against steel beneath the snow. The boy gasped in the seat beside me. I stopped immediately, heart steady, mind clearer than it had been in days, because this was the moment everything aligned. Evidence, intent, harm, all in one place. I stepped out, wind screaming, snow cutting across my face. I grabbed the probe rod from the back, drove it down, hit the metal again, confirmed. Then I turned back to the truck, opened the door, looked at her. "They put this here on purpose," I said. Her face changed, fear, turning into something else, understanding. I walked back to the front, dropped the plow blade. The sound echoed through the storm, heavy, final. And for the first time since this started, I wasn't holding back. Because this wasn't about their rules anymore. This was about getting a kid to a hospital. I climbed back in, gripped the wheel, and pushed forward. The blade hit the snow first, then the buried barrier, metal grinding, resistance, then movement. Slow at first, then braking. The barrier shifted, bent, gave way. Not clean, not quiet, but enough. I pushed through, snow exploding outward, path opening behind us. The rest of the drive was a blur, focus narrowed, hands steady, engine loud. We made it to the main road, then to town, then to the hospital. I didn't wait for thanks, didn't stay for updates, because I already knew. He'd make it. On the drive back, the storm had eased slightly. Not enough to fix anything, but enough to see the road, the damage, the path I had forced open. And behind me, the evidence. Clear, undeniable. Because now, it wasn't just about fines, or contracts, or control. They had crossed into something else, something that courts don't ignore, something that changes everything. I parked the truck, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment, listening to the silence. Then I reached for my phone, opened the document, and added a new section. Emergency obstruction resulting in medical risk, intentional placement of barriers, preventing access, direct intervention required to prevent potential fatality. I paused, then added one more line. Personal involvement as responding party with documented evidence, because my role in this had just changed. I wasn't just observing anymore. I was part of the case, and that meant one thing. There was no going back. Outside, the wind had finally started to die down, but the damage was done, not by the storm, by the people who used it. And now, they were going to answer for it. The storm broke just before dawn, not all at once. It unraveled. Wind fading first, then the snow easing into a soft drifting fall, then silence. The kind that comes after something has already changed everything. I stepped outside slowly, boots sinking deep into what used to be a road. The path I had forced open the night before was still there, but barely. Already softening, already collapsing in on itself, because I hadn't maintained it. And neither had they. That was the difference now. I had proven I could clear it, and I had chosen not to. The valley stretched out in front of me, white and still. And for the first time since this started, no tracks, no movement, no quiet, early morning vehicles slipping through the hidden gaps. Nothing. Because without me, the road didn't exist. I walked out about 20 yards, stopped, looked down. The snow had already started to seal over the path where I'd pushed through the barrier. The metal I had bent was still buried beneath. But now it didn't matter, because the real barrier wasn't physical anymore. It was absence. My phone buzzed, then again and again. This time not just texts, calls, missed notifications, emails, all at once. I didn't check them immediately, didn't need to, because I already knew what they were going to say. They were stuck. I went back inside, poured coffee, sat at the table, then finally opened the first message. Road's gone. Completely. Next, they can't get the plow out. Another. They're asking if you're clearing today. I read that one twice, then set the phone down. Because that question, that was the turning point. Not legally, not yet, but socially. Because for the first time, they weren't talking at me. They were talking to me. At 8:12 a.m., the HOA sent another email. Subject line, urgent resident cooperation required. I opened it. Due to severe overnight conditions, we are requesting assistance from residents with snow removal equipment to help restore access. Requesting. Not ordering. Not fining. Requesting. I leaned back slightly, because that shift in language, that's what pressure looks like. Then came the next line. We remind all residents that unauthorized plowing activities may still result in penalties under current enforcement guidelines. I actually smiled at that. Because even now, they were trying to hold both sides, control and dependency. They hadn't realized yet that they couldn't have both. My phone rang. Same board member from yesterday. I let it ring twice, then answered, and his voice was different now, less controlled, more careful. We need to talk, he said. I didn't respond, just listened. The road situation is critical. We're working on solutions, but you had a plow, I cut in. Silence. Then, that's not the point. No, I said quietly. It is. Another pause, longer this time. Then look, we can resolve this, internally. There it was, the offer. Not stated directly, but implied. Keep it quiet. Work it out. No exposure, no consequences. I stood up slowly, walked to the window, looked out at the road that no longer existed. At this point, I said there's no internal left. He didn't respond immediately, because he knew they had gone too far. By mid-morning, the situation escalated. Not because of me, because of reality. Emergency vehicles couldn't get through. Deliveries stopped. People started running low on supplies. And most importantly, word spread. The first post showed up on social media around 10:03 a.m. A photo of the road, or what used to be the road. Caption HOA locked us in during a snowstorm. No access, no help. Within minutes, comments, shares, questions. Then more posts, different angles, different houses. Same story. Isolation, control, failure. I didn't post anything, didn't need to. Because the truth was already out there, and unlike snow, it wasn't going to melt away. At 11:27 a.m., I got the call I had been waiting for. The accountant. I have everything she said, her voice steady now. Resolved, ledgers, emails, payment approvals. It's worse than I thought. I closed my eyes for a second, because part of me had expected that. What did you find, I asked. Kickbacks, she said. Fake vendor accounts. Board members approving payments to entities they control. There it was. Clear. Direct. Not just mismanagement. Fraud. How far back, I asked. 2 years, maybe more. I nodded slowly. Because that timeline, that pattern, that's what turns a case into something bigger. Can you prove it, I asked. Yes, no hesitation. That mattered. Good, I said. Good, she repeated. I looked out the window again, at the road, at the silence. At this point, I said they've already proven everything else. Around noon, I stepped outside again. The sky had cleared slightly, just enough to let light through, and with it, perspective. The HOA cluster sat still in the distance. No movement, no vehicles, no activity. Because they couldn't move. Not without the road. And the road was gone. I walked down a little further, stopped at the spot where the barrier had been. The snow had fully covered it now. No sign it had ever been there, except I knew. And more importantly, I had it on camera. That's the thing about systems like this. They rely on invisibility, on the assumption that what can't be seen can't be proven. But they forgot something. Visibility isn't about what's obvious. It's about what's documented. My phone buzzed again. Different number. This time, local news. We've received reports about road access issues in your area. Can you comment? I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back yes. Because this wasn't about revenge. Not anymore. It was about exposure, accountability, and making sure this never happened again. Back inside, I opened the document. Preliminary findings. It wasn't preliminary anymore. It was a case file. I added the final section. Confirmed financial fraud through forensic accounting, documented selective enforcement and access restriction. Evidence of deliberate endangerment of residents. External interest from media and potential regulatory bodies. I stopped. Then added one last line. Recommendation. Immediate legal action and injunction. I saved the file. Backed it up. Then sent copies to the county. to a civil attorney I hadn't spoken to in years, and finally, to myself, because once this moved forward, there would be no stopping it. Outside, the snow continued to fall lightly, soft, almost peaceful, like nothing had happened. But beneath it, everything had changed. Because the road wasn't the only thing that had vanished, so had their control. They just hadn't realized it yet. The call came just after 6:10 a.m. I hadn't slept much, didn't need to, because once a case reaches a certain point, your mind doesn't shut off. It organizes, prepares, anticipates. My phone buzzed once on the table. Name on the screen. Someone I hadn't spoken to in years. I answered. You still build cases like you used to. His voice hadn't changed. Still sharp, still direct. I let a second pass. Depends, I said. What kind of case? He exhaled lightly. The kind where people think they're too small to get caught. I almost smiled. Then yeah, I said. I still do. By 7:30 a.m., we were on a video call. Him in an office that looked exactly the same as I remembered. Me at my kitchen table, laptop open, files ready. I didn't start with the story. I started with the structure. Timeline first. Violation notices, selective enforcement, road degradation, barrier placement, emergency obstruction. Then the footage. I shared the clips, no commentary. Just let them play. SUV crossing the road, HOA insignia visible. Barrier being installed, hidden gap. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions, just watched. Then I moved to the financials, ledger entries, ghost vendor, payment totals, cross-referenced dates. Then the accountant's documents, emails, approvals, names, connections. Board members authorizing payments to entities tied directly back to them. He leaned back slowly. That's not sloppy, he said. No, I replied. It's consistent. He nodded. Which makes it worse. We didn't talk about whether to file. That part was already decided. We talked about how. Because how you file determines how fast things move. Injunction first, he said. Immediate. I nodded. Access restoration, I added. Emergency grounds. Good, he said. Then civil complaint. Breach of fiduciary duty fraud, selective enforcement. Rico Engel, I asked. He paused. Considered. Maybe, he said. We don't lead with it. But we build toward it. That was the right call. You don't overreach. You let the evidence expand the case. By 9:15 a.m., the paperwork was already in motion. Drafted, structured, tight. Because this wasn't theory anymore. This was documentation. And documentation wins. The injunction request went first, filed with the county court. Emergency basis, grounds, immediate risk to resident safety, obstruction of primary access, road, evidence of intentional restriction of emergency services, attached exhibits, video footage, photographic evidence, resident statements, medical incident report from the previous night. That last one mattered. Because courts move faster when harm is real. By noon, the second filing followed. Civil complaint, longer, heavier, more detailed. Counts included breach of fiduciary duty, fraud and misrepresentation, selective enforcement, unjust enrichment, civil conspiracy, each one supported, each one documented. No speculation, no exaggeration, just facts. Layered, connected, unavoidable. I didn't celebrate, didn't feel relief, because filing isn't the end, it's the beginning. The HOA responded faster than I expected. Emergency meeting, closed session. No residents allowed. That alone told me everything. Because transparency only disappears when there's something to hide. By mid-afternoon, I got the message. They're saying you're overreacting. I read it once, then deleted it, because I'd heard that before. Every case starts that way. Dismissal, minimization, until the evidence becomes too heavy to ignore. At 3:42 p.m., the court clerk called. Direct, efficient. The judge has reviewed the emergency filing. Temporary order pending review will be issued within hours. I thanked her, hung up. And for the first time, I allowed myself to sit back. Not relax, just acknowledge. We had moved it out of their control and into a system that didn't answer to them. Outside, the road was still gone. But that didn't matter anymore, because now, the absence itself was evidence. The media piece went live at 4:15 p.m., short, direct. No names yet, just facts. Residents trapped following HOA road closure during severe winter storm. Footage included, not mine. But enough. Because once a story hits public space, it doesn't stay contained. My phone lit up again, this time with numbers I didn't recognize. Residents, reporters, officials, all asking the same thing. What's really going on? I answered carefully, consistently. Everything is documented. Legal action is underway, no more, no less. Because the story didn't need help. It just needed time. At 6:03 p.m., the order came through. Temporary injunction granted, effective immediately. I read it twice, then a third time, because words matter, especially these. The HOA is hereby ordered to cease all access restrictions and restore reasonable ingress and egress for all residents without discrimination. Cease, restore, without discrimination, clear, direct, enforceable. I stood up slowly, walked to the window, looked out at the road, still buried, still silent, but not for long. My phone rang again. Same board member. I answered. Didn't speak. He did. You forced this, he said, voice tight, controlled anger. I let a second pass. Then no, I said quietly. You did. Silence. Then this isn't over. I nodded slightly. Even though he couldn't see it. I know I said. It's just started. After the call ended, I stepped outside. The air was calmer now. Storm finally passing, sky beginning to clear, and in the distance, I heard it. Faint at first. Then louder, engines, multiple, approaching. County vehicles, plows, official, authorized. Because now, access wasn't a favor. It was a requirement. I stood there as they reached the road. Watched as the first blade dropped. Cut through the snow, clean, direct. No hesitation. Because this time, there was no confusion about what needed to be done. And just like that, the road began to reappear. Not all at once, but enough. Enough for movement. Enough for access. Enough for people to breathe again. I didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Because this was what accountability looks like. Not dramatic, not loud, just inevitable. Back inside, I opened the case file one more time. Added a final note for the day. Temporary injunction granted, county, intervention, initiated, access restoration underway. I paused. Then added one more line. Next phase, full exposure, because while the road was coming back, the case was just getting started. And what came next would be impossible for them to bury. The road came back in strips, not smooth, not perfect, but visible. And that was enough. Because visibility changes everything. By the time the county plows finished their first pass, people were already outside. Not driving. Not yet. Just standing. Watching. Like they were seeing something they hadn't been allowed to see before. The road. Their road. I didn't join them. I stayed inside, watching from the window. Because I knew what was coming next, and it wouldn't happen out there. It would happen where they thought they still had control. The notice went out at 10:14 a.m. Emergency community meeting, attendance required, location clubhouse. Of course, I read it once, then closed the email, because this was the moment systems either collapse or double down. By noon, the parking area outside the clubhouse was full. Cars lined up unevenly, some still half covered in snow. People stood in small groups talking in low voices. Not the usual HOA tone. Not polite, not controlled. Something else. Tension. I walked in last, not deliberately, just on time. The room was already crowded, standing room only. Board members at the front, seated, elevated, like always. But something was different. They weren't relaxed, they weren't confident. They were watching the room. Because for the first time, the room wasn't with them. I took a place near the back, arms crossed, silent. Because I wasn't there to speak, not yet. The president stood first, Karen Whitfield, mid-50s, perfect posture, perfect tone, the same controlled voice she'd used in every notice. We understand there has been confusion regarding recent safety measures. Confusion, someone cut in. A man near the front, angry, loud. My wife couldn't get to work for 3 days. Murmurs spread, voices rising. Karen raised a hand, calm, practiced. We are addressing those concerns. The board acted in accordance with Then why were your cars still driving? Another voice snapped. That one landed. Hard. Because now, it wasn't just frustration. It was awareness. Karen paused. Just for a second. But it was enough. Because control doesn't slip all at once. It cracks. We had authorized vehicles, ensuring I stepped forward. Didn't raise my voice, didn't need to. Authorized by who? The room went quiet. Not silent. Focused. She looked at me. Recognition. Immediate. Because she knew. The board, she said. Simple. Controlled. Still trying. I nodded once. Then you won't have a problem explaining this. I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen, turned it toward the room. The video played. SUV crossing the barrier. HOA insignia clear. Hidden access point visible. No commentary. Just evidence. You could feel the shift. Not loud, not explosive, but absolute. Because people weren't hearing claims anymore. They were seeing it. Karen's expression didn't collapse. Not completely. But it changed. Subtle. Tightening around the eyes. Calculation replacing control. That footage is being taken out of context. No, I said quietly. It isn't. I tapped again. Second clip. Barrier installation. Night. No signage, no notice. Just action. The room erupted. Voices overlapping. Questions, accusations, anger. Real this time. Not polite disagreement. Not procedural frustration. This was betrayal. I stepped back. Let it happen. Because this part had to come from them. Then the accountant stood up, near the side, quiet until now. I worked for them, she said. The room turned, attention shifting. They told me to approve payments that didn't exist. That cut through everything. Silence, immediate. Karen stood, faster this time. That is a serious allegation. It's documented, the accountant replied. No hesitation, no fear. I have copies, emails, approvals, vendor accounts tied back to board members. The silence deepened. Because now, it wasn't just about access, it was about money. I stepped forward again, just enough. High Ridge Winter Services, I said. A few heads turned. Recognition, confusion, then realization. Doesn't exist, I continued. Never did. Karen's jaw tightened. One of the other board members shifted in his seat. Subtle, but visible. I didn't rush, didn't press, just let the facts sit. Because pressure builds better in silence. Then I added the final piece. The court granted an injunction this morning. That got everyone's attention. All access restrictions are now illegal. Murmurs again. But different. Not confusion. Relief. Karen tried to recover. We were acting in the best interest of who, someone shouted. No answer. Because there wasn't one. Not anymore. The room turned. Not physically. Emotionally. The board wasn't leading anymore. They were reacting. A man near the center raised his voice. We need a recall vote. That word hit like a hammer. Recall. Not complaint, not discussion, removal. Others joined in. Voices rising again. Agreement spreading. Because once trust breaks, it doesn't come back. Karen looked around the room, trying to find control, but it wasn't there. Not anymore, because control doesn't survive exposure. I stepped back again, silent, because my part was done. The meeting didn't end cleanly. There was no resolution, no formal close, just people talking, organizing, planning, because now they understood. Outside, the sky had cleared completely. Sunlight hitting the snow, bright, sharp, unforgiving. I walked back to my truck slowly, not in a hurry, because the urgency had shifted from survival to accountability. My phone buzzed. A message from my attorney. They're scrambling. This is going to move fast. I typed back, I know. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, engine off, hands still. Because there's a point in every case where it stops being about proving something and starts being about what happens next. And what happened next wasn't up to them anymore. Behind me, the clubhouse doors opened. Voices spilled out into the cold air. Not quiet anymore, not controlled, real. And for the first time since this started, the community wasn't divided. It was awake. I started the engine, let it idle, then pulled forward slowly, onto the road. The same road they had tried to erase, but it was still there. And now? So was the truth. The snow didn't disappear overnight. It never does. It softens first. Edges lose their sharpness. Drifts sag. Ice begins to loosen its grip on everything it held too tightly. That's how it started. Not dramatic. Not sudden. Just inevitable. The road was fully open within 2 days. County crews didn't leave it half-finished. They stayed. Documented. Measured. Because once a court order is in place, every action becomes part of the record. I drove it that morning without the plow. First time in over a week. The tires rolled clean. No resistance, no guessing, just a road. The way it should have been all along. But what had changed wasn't the road. It was everything around it. The second filing hit harder than the first. Once the injunction was in place, the civil case moved fast. Discovery requests went out immediately. Financial records, internal communications, vendor documentation, everything. And this time, they couldn't stall. Within a week, the first responses came back. Incomplete, disorganized, but telling. Because when people try to hide something, they rarely do it cleanly. The accountant's files filled in the gaps. Clean copies, unaltered, emails with timestamps, approvals tied directly to board members, money routed through shell accounts, and always the same name, High Ridge Winter Services. It didn't take long to prove what we already knew. It never existed. Not as a company, not as a contractor, just a funnel. A way to move money from HOA accounts into personal ones. The numbers added up fast, over 2 years. Hundreds of thousands, taken, hidden, justified under maintenance, while the actual road was left to fail. The county got involved next, not just for the road, for everything. Audits, inspections, reviews of prior complaints that had quietly disappeared. Because once one piece breaks, others follow. Then came the letters. Not violation notices, not fines. Official notices. From regulators, from investigators, from people who don't ask politely. The board didn't last long after that. Resignations first, quiet, one by one. Then removal, formal, recorded. Because the recall vote passed almost unanimously. Karen Whitfield was the last to go. Of course she was. People like her don't step down easily. They hold on, even when everything around them has already collapsed. I saw her once more. Outside the clubhouse, no crowd, no meeting. Just her. Standing alone, the same coat, the same posture. But something was different. Not fear, not anger. Absence, like the structure she relied on, was no longer there. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. Because there was nothing left to argue. The case didn't end quickly. Legal processes never do. But it moved. Steadily. Because the evidence was clean, structured, unavoidable. Breach of fiduciary duty, proven. Fraud, documented. Selective enforcement, recorded. Endangerment, established. The RICO angle came later. Not as a theory, as an expansion. Because once the financial pattern was clear, it wasn't just misconduct. It was a system. Assets were frozen. Accounts reviewed. Transactions traced. And for the first time, they weren't controlling the flow anymore. The settlement didn't come quietly, but it came. Because at a certain point, there's no defense left. Restitution funds were created. Residents reimbursed. Not just for fines, for damages, for time, for risk. New board elections followed. Different people, different tone, less control, more accountability. Because once something breaks like that, it doesn't rebuild the same way. The road stayed open after that, not because of policy, because people understood what it meant. I still plowed it, sometimes, when it made sense, when it helped. But not because I had to, and not because anyone could force me. The cameras stayed up, not hidden, not aggressive, just present, a reminder. Spring came slowly, snow melting into runoff, the valley shifting back into something familiar, grass returning, road edges visible again, and with it, a kind of quiet I hadn't felt in a long time. Not the heavy kind, not the waiting kind, just quiet. The boy made it. I found that out Weeks later, his mother stopped by, left a note, simple. Thank you for not waiting. I kept that one. Didn't file it, didn't document it, just kept it. Because not everything belongs in a case file. The final hearing wasn't dramatic. No speeches, no big moments. Just a judge, a record, and decisions. Liability assigned, penalties issued, oversight mandated. And one line that stayed with me, access to one's home shall not be subject to arbitrary control. Simple, clear, final. I drove home after that. Same road, different wait. Because it wasn't just about getting somewhere anymore. It was about knowing you could. That night, I sat at the same table where this started. The first letter still there. Folded, marked, disputed. I looked at it for a long time. Then finally, I threw it away. Because it had never really been about the fine, or the tracks, or even the road. It was about what happens when people forget that systems are supposed to serve, not control. And what happens when someone decides to remind them. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone watching this unfold, it's this: document everything. Ask questions. Don't assume silence means safety. Because the moment you stop paying attention, that's when control takes hold. But the moment you push back, even quietly, even alone, that's when it starts to break. The snow melts, the road comes back, and the truth stays.